seizure of weapons from the homes of law-abiding American citizens.
Could lose the ability to use these tools, and as a result, may not be able to operate their firearm.
Supporting the National Organization Women's Legal Defense Fund. I didn't know.
Our Second Amendment. It's a hell no to government trampling on our freedoms.
History has been made as the Supreme Court dismantles concealed carry laws. The ruling marks a seismic shift in gun rights. Get the details on this groundbreaking decision. Supreme Court's gun rights. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court of the United States has just ruled on the case of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Inc. versus Bruin. This ruling pertains to concealed carry laws, specifically in New York, and has far-reaching implications for the interpretation and application of the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The New York State law in question required applicants for concealed carry permits to demonstrate a proper cause for carrying a firearm outside their homes. This proper cause provision, which had been in effect since 1911, mandated that individuals provide a specific reason beyond general self-defense to obtain a concealed carry permit. The Supreme Court's recent decision has struck down this requirement, deeming it a violation of the Second Amendment.
Most significant federal gun restrictions in decades on Friday following years of false starts and failures to tighten gun laws.
That you said that all assault weapons should be banned. Is that a fair statement?
The ruling is a significant victory for gun rights advocates, who argued that the proper cause provision imposed an undue burden on an individual's right to bear arms for self-defense. It represents the most substantial expansion of gun rights by the Supreme Court in over a decade. This decision strengthens the interpretation of the Second Amendment as a personal right to possess and carry firearms. The impact of this ruling extends beyond New York. Laws in 8 other states, as well as the District of Columbia, that impose similar restrictions on concealed carry permits may now be subject to legal challenges. The precedent set by this case calls into question the constitutionality of such restrictions and may prompt a reevaluation of concealed carry laws across multiple jurisdictions. However, not all members of the Supreme Court were in agreement. The 3 liberal justices dissented from the majority opinion. Justice Stephen Breyer, in his dissenting opinion, contended that the proper cause requirement was a reasonable regulation aimed at safeguarding public safety, asserting that it did not infringe upon an individual's Second Amendment rights. This ruling has broader implications for the balance of power between state and federal authorities in regulating firearms. It asserts that certain state-level restrictions on gun ownership may be subject to federal scrutiny if they are deemed to impinge upon constitutional rights.
An escalation in violence perpetrated with guns, particularly among our young people, in a manner that I have never seen before.
Criminals will always find guns.
Absolutely.
And it is the cities with the most restrictive gun policies in the country where...
Additionally, the decision may catalyze discussions surrounding potential federal legislation related to gun control, as well as prompt states to review and potentially amend their concealed carry permit laws in light of the court's decision. Looking ahead, the Supreme Court's decision in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Inc. versus Bruin case sets a significant precedent. It may influence future legal challenges related to gun rights, potentially shaping the landscape of gun control laws in the U.S. The ruling stands as a pivotal moment in the ongoing discourse surrounding gun rights and regulations in the country. Balancing act begins. The recent Supreme Court ruling in the case of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Inc. versus Bruin, authored by Justice Clarence Thomas, has reignited a passionate and contentious debate at the intersection of gun rights and public safety. In his majority opinion, Justice Thomas invoked the Constitution's 14th Amendment, a cornerstone of American civil liberties, which guarantees citizens the right to equal protection under the law. Thomas argued that New York's law, which required applicants for concealed carry permits to demonstrate a proper cause for carrying a firearm outside their homes, effectively hindered law-abiding citizens with ordinary self-defense needs from fully exercising their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. This decision unfolded against the backdrop of 2 heart-wrenching mass shootings, one at a Buffalo, New York grocery store and another at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. These events, with their tragic loss of life and indelible impact on the communities affected, have refocused national attention on the pressing need for meaningful reform in U.S. gun laws. They serve as a stark reminder of the urgency to find a delicate equilibrium between upholding citizens' constitutional rights and safeguarding the broader public.
Defund the police, and then they want to take our Second Amendment right to defend ourselves.
that men and women in this country have the right to defend their own lives.
Democratic elected officials have swiftly and resolutely voiced their opposition to the ruling, underscoring their concerns about the potential implications for public safety. President Joe Biden in particular expressed his deep disappointment, asserting that the decision not only runs counter to common sense, but also contradicts the very essence of the Constitution itself. He emphasized the critical need for individual states to pass what he characterized as common sense gun regulations, with the aim of fortifying the safety and security of citizens and communities grappling with the persistent threat of gun violence. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, too, was unequivocal in her condemnation of the decision. She characterized it as not just reckless but morally reprehensible. Governor Hochul pointed out that in the absence of comprehensive federal laws addressing gun control, states and their governors bear a moral responsibility to enact measures that protect their citizens. She underscored the gravity of the pervasive gun culture that had taken hold, not only in society at large, but even within the highest echelons of the judiciary, including the Supreme Court.
Guns don't kill people. People kill people. Criminals, miscreants will always get their hands on guns.
Second Amendment protects firearms in common use at the time and also said this, quote, for lawful purposes like self-defense.
But, Madam Speaker, guns have been prevalent in the United States of America since before our founding.
The reactions from President Biden and Governor Hochul lay bare the deeply divisive and polarizing nature of this issue. They illuminate the immense challenge facing policymakers who must navigate a treacherous path that respects individual rights, while also addressing the urgent need for public safety in a nation grappling with the profound and far-reaching impact of gun violence. The Supreme Court's ruling, as anticipated, will serve to intensify the ongoing discussions and debates about the appropriate balance between gun rights and regulation. It will inevitably reverberate through future legislative and legal battles surrounding gun control in the U.S., shaping the trajectory of this deeply entrenched and highly charged national discourse. Concealed carry handgun licenses. In a groundbreaking decision, the U.S. Supreme Court recently ruled that New York's stringent concealed carry licensing law was inconsistent with the Second Amendment's protection of citizens' right to bear arms.
A critical and urgent issue, gun violence in America. We're here because gun violence is destroying communities.
Our Second Amendment. It's a hell no to government trampling on our freedoms.
This ruling, which stems from a case brought forward by the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association and its members, Robert Nash and Brandon Koch, has sparked extensive debate regarding gun control, public safety, and individual rights. At the heart of the case was the New York state law that governed concealed carry licenses. According to this law, applicants were required to possess both good moral character and demonstrate proper cause to carry handguns in public. Nash and Koch's applications for concealed carry licenses were rejected on the grounds that they did not adequately prove a specific need for self-protection, a decision that was upheld by the state's highest court. The plaintiffs argued that this requirement violated the Second Amendment, which guarantees the right of law-abiding citizens to bear arms. They contended that the proper cause provision unfairly restricted their ability to exercise this fundamental right.
This rule turns law-abiding gun owners into felons is a result of unelected bureaucrats.
If you were serious, you would acknowledge that 96% of mass public shootings happen in an area where guns are banned.
They were assaulted and shot by someone and couldn't defend themselves because their guns were taken from them.
The case subsequently made its way through the federal court system, with both the New York federal judge and the U.S. Second Circuit Court of Appeals siding with the state's interpretation of the law. However, the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately took up the case and delivered a majority opinion authored by Justice Clarence Thomas. In his ruling, Thomas emphasized that New York's proper cause requirement, as it had been interpreted by state courts, ran contrary to the historical context of firearm regulation in the U.S. He asserted that a state cannot prohibit law-abiding citizens from publicly carrying handguns solely based on their failure to demonstrate a specialized need for self-defense. Mayor Eric Adams of New York City expressed strong dissent, contending that the decision had jeopardized public safety, making everyone more vulnerable to gun violence. His sentiment echoes the broader debate surrounding gun control in the U.S., where proponents of stricter regulations argue that easing restrictions on concealed carry can lead to increased risks and incidents of gun violence. On the other hand, proponents of the Supreme Court's decision argue that it upholds the constitutional rights of citizens to protect themselves, potentially deterring criminal activity. They maintain that individuals should not be required to demonstrate a specific need for self-defense, as this undermines the fundamental right to bear arms as outlined in the Second Amendment. This landmark ruling is likely to have far-reaching implications for gun control legislation not only in New York but across the U.S. It underscores the delicate balance between individual rights and public safety, a tension that has long defined discussions surrounding gun control in the country.
For God's sake, America already has more guns than people. How many guns do we need until everybody is safe?
Supporting the National Organization Women's Legal Defense Fund. I didn't know.
Getting assault weapons, AR-15s, out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them.
Moving forward, policymakers and lawmakers will need to grapple with the challenge of striking a balance between preserving constitutional rights and implementing measures that safeguard public well-being. As the legal landscape surrounding gun control continues to evolve, the decision in this case will undoubtedly serve as a focal point in the ongoing national conversation about firearms regulation and individual liberties. Breyer's dissent. Justice Stephen Breyer's dissenting opinion in the recent Supreme Court case on New York's concealed carry law provides a crucial counterpoint to the majority's decision. Breyer's dissent highlights the importance of historical context and emphasizes the role of state regulations in addressing the complexities of gun violence. Breyer begins by asserting that the majority's decision overlooks a substantial body of historical evidence that supports regulations restricting the public carriage of firearms. This historical perspective is critical in understanding the evolution of firearm regulation in the U.S. From the early days of the nation, states have implemented various measures to strike a balance between individual rights and public safety concerning firearms.
Because I hope we'll do more. Because the city of Indianapolis has higher murder rates than the city of Chicago.
Could lose the ability to use these tools, and as a result, may not be able to operate their firearm.
Ban assault weapons. Ban them again. Do it now. Enough. Do something.
He further argues that many states have grappled with the multifaceted challenges posed by gun violence by enacting laws that regulate who may purchase, carry, or use firearms. These laws are tailored to the unique circumstances and demographics of each state, reflecting the diverse approaches taken by states to address their specific concerns regarding public safety and firearm access. Breyer's dissent underscores the principle of federalism, which empowers individual states to implement regulations that best suit their particular needs and circumstances. This principle acknowledges that what works in one state may not necessarily be appropriate for another, considering the differences in population, density, urbanization, crime rates, and cultural attitudes towards firearms. By emphasizing the burden placed on states by the majority's decision, Breyer sheds light on the potential consequences for state-led efforts to mitigate gun violence. States have been at the forefront of developing innovative and effective strategies to address firearm-related dangers, reflecting the unique challenges and priorities of their communities. The dissent also raises questions about the potential implications of the ruling on other states with similar concealed carry laws. It suggests that this decision may not only affect New York, but could have a domino effect on other states' ability to implement and enforce their own firearm regulations, potentially leading to a broader shift in the national landscape of gun control.
Americans have the fundamental right to keep and bear arms that shall not be infringed.
Seizure of weapons from the homes of law-abiding American citizens.
In Swift, Breyer's dissent serves as a vital reminder of the intricate interplay between federal and state authority in matters of firearm regulation. It emphasizes the historical context of firearms laws in the U.S. and highlights the diverse approaches taken by states to address gun violence. Additionally, it draws attention to the potential consequences of the majority's decision on states' capacity to enact and enforce their own firearm regulations, ultimately underscoring the complexity and importance of this issue in American society. Gun rights precedent across history. A recent court decision has highlighted the crucial significance of historical precedent in establishing the legitimacy of weapons prohibitions in the context of Second Amendment rights and concealed carry laws. The court's ruling, which carefully considered the defendant's case, emphasizes the need for the government to provide historical support before restricting someone's enjoyment of their Second Amendment rights. At the heart of the issue is the government's need to present a historical precedent that supports the current legislation. The court underscores that part of the government's task is to identify historical customs that persisted before, during, and after the country's formation. Such customs should be consistent with the pattern of regulation, which, if established, might exclude the rule from the categorical demand of the Second Amendment. The decision goes on to explain that the defendant's actions, which included carrying a gun, categorically come under the Second Amendment's guarantee of protection.
They say they're not opposed to the Second Amendment.
That the majority of responsible gun owners already support.
As a result, it is now the Commonwealth's responsibility to prove that the law is sound by showing how it fits into the country's overall history of guns control. The Commonwealth has failed to provide any historical precedent that restricts the enjoyment of a federal constitutional right, such as the right to bear weapons, to the bounds of the resident state, according to the court's crucial observation. Equally persuasive is the court's evaluation of the Commonwealth's arguments in opposition to the defendant's allegation of equal protection breaches. The possession of a firearm was considered a privilege in Massachusetts until the landmark Bruen case. Residents and non-residents received different treatment, with non-residents having access to license applications but not the same rights as residents. Furthermore, there is skepticism against the Commonwealth's claim that the licensing system imposes allowable burdens since it has a stake in prohibiting some people from owning weapons. The court calls attention to the fact that there is already a federal legislation, 18 U.S.C. Section 922G, that lists several groups of people who are forbidden from being in the country at large. The argument that Massachusetts' rule adds a justified layer of hardship is rejected by the court, given that this federal law is applicable through the whole nation. In the end, the court rules that a person should not be considered guilty of a crime simply by traveling through Massachusetts while properly exercising their right to carry weapons as a citizen of New Hampshire. The court emphasizes that the recent Bruen case has set a precedent calling for licenses to be issued absent particular disqualifications. Massachusetts' effort to enforce non-resident concealed carry licenses is thoroughly examined in this district court decision and ultimately rejected. The interaction between historical precedent, federal law, and the categorical statement of Second Amendment rights is highlighted by the court's thorough study. This ruling has a significant impact on the debate over gun control laws and the constitutional protections that underpin them as the judicial system develops. Moving between states. The court's ruling reveals a rare constitutional conundrum about the right to bear guns when traveling across state boundaries. The decision starkly sheds light on an exceptional situation, a constitutional privilege that vanishes as soon as a person visits another state from their home state. This strange situation is shown by a person who, although lawfully enjoying their right inside the borders of their own state, immediately changes upon entering another state into a criminal liable to a mandatory minimum sentence of jail.
Gun violence does not discriminate. It happens everywhere and all the time.
Keeping guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves and others.
The case is special and disturbing, as the court's perceptive remark highlights. Fundamental conceptions of justice and consistency in the implementation of constitutional rights are called into question by the idea that the act of crossing state boundaries may suddenly deprive a person of a constitutional right and subject them to severe criminal punishment. The court has determined that the Massachusetts legislation in question, GL 269 Section 10A, is unconstitutional in this particular case because of the defendant's circumstances. The predicament of the defendant acts as the focal point of the legal discussion, encapsulating the conflict between the right to carry weapons and the differences that occur while exercising this right in other jurisdictions. This historic pronouncement is recognized by the District Court Judge John F. Coffey's signature in accordance with Massachusetts law. It is important to emphasize that this challenge's nature is unique to the state of Massachusetts. This legal dispute, which pits a person against a state statute, is being heard in a state court. The challenge is divided into two categories: a facial challenge, which casts doubt on the legality of the legislation as a whole, and an as-applied challenge, which focuses on how the law applies to the particular defendant in issue. In this case, the court concludes that the statute is unconstitutional as it applies to this particular person. This case's relevance goes beyond its immediate ramifications. It is an innovative move to use the Bruen ruling to challenge a state-level concealed carry statute due to reciprocity issues. As the judicial system continues to wrestle with the complicated web of concealed carry laws in a country where state lines frequently obscure the bounds of constitutional rights, this precedent-setting decision may very well be the first of many challenges to state-level legislation. The coherence and consistency of constitutional rights across state boundaries are seriously questioned by this case. It not only exemplifies the puzzling nature of this constitutional oddity, but also represents a turning point in legal history, possibly igniting a chain reaction of judicial challenges to state concealed carry reciprocity statutes. Although it is unclear how these issues will turn up, there is no denying that they have had an influence on the Second Amendment and interstate gun rights discussions. Impact of recent Supreme Court ruling. The recent Supreme Court decision affirming a constitutional right to carry handguns in public for self-defense has ignited a contentious debate on the history of gun ownership and regulation in the U.S. Contrary to the popular notion of an unregulated gun-toting America throughout history, the reality is far more nuanced. Handgun ownership was not widespread until after the Civil War due to factors such as their expense, inaccuracy, and single-shot limitations. It was the development of practical and reliable multi-shot handguns, coupled with effective marketing, that led to a surge in civilian ownership. By the 1800s, 38 states had instituted laws restricting concealed or open carrying of firearms, with 5 more states following suit in the early 1900s. This historical record challenges the notion of an inherent unregulated right to carry firearms in public. Closely connected to concealed carry restrictions were laws against brandishing and displaying weapons. These laws, too, have a long history in the U.S. dating back to the country's earliest days. From the 1600s to the 1930s, at least 36 states enacted laws penalizing the brandishing or display of weapons, underscoring the perception that carrying firearms in public was inherently threatening, irrespective of intent.
Prohibiting the public from carrying concealed guns in certain sensitive areas
gives private citizens the right to possess a firearm.
Modern research further supports this historical understanding. Studies show that the presence of firearms heightens the likelihood of conflict escalation, rather than acting as a deterrent. A recent study covering over 30,000 demonstrations nationwide from 2020 to 2021 found that armed demonstrations were over 6 times more likely to turn violent or destructive compared to unarmed demonstrations. The fatality rate in armed demonstrations was 5 times higher. This underscores that an unfettered right to carry deadly weapons in society has never been a reality, nor is it advisable. The concern over personal self-defense, often cited as a chief justification for broadening gun carry rights, is also subject to scrutiny. Numerous studies indicate that loosening concealed carry restrictions correlates with an increase in violent crime rates. For example, one study found that such loosening led to a 13 to 15% rise in violent crime. Another study demonstrated an over 10% increase in handgun murder rates. The evidence is clear: relaxing restrictions on gun carrying is associated with higher rates of gun-related violence. The Supreme Court ruling will have far-reaching consequences. States with laws similar to New York's will need to revisit and potentially revise their permitting regulations. The decision is likely to spur a new wave of legal challenges to various gun laws as litigants seek to expand the scope of this ruling. Furthermore, an increase in gun carrying may result in a rise in gun-related incidents, a reality that the court majority may not fully appreciate in light of historical precedent. In supposition, understanding the historical context of gun ownership and regulation in the U.S. is crucial in evaluating the implications of the recent Supreme Court decision. It challenges widely held misconceptions about the nation's gun culture and underscores the importance of measured regulation for public safety. Analyses of the Second Amendment. The latest Supreme Court ruling reflects the stark cultural differences that influence how the Second Amendment is interpreted in the U.S. This decision, which strikes down concealed carry legislation, intensifies the conflict between opposing views on gun rights and public safety. The decision's supporters emphasize the historical relevance of an armed populace as a barrier against tyranny and see it as a victory for individual liberty. This viewpoint is consistent with a societal trend toward independence and self-defense. Opponents, on the other hand, voice worries over the possibility of increasing firearm accessibility in the absence of strict rules. The choice accentuates the ongoing conflict between two cultural tendencies. It emphasizes how difficult it is to balance individual liberty with the greater good of society. The discussion that follows will bridge these cultural gaps and shape the country's ongoing debate regarding the Second Amendment's limitations and its implications for everyday life in the U.S.
And others prompting the governor to put a public health order in place taking aim at gun violence.
Here's the amount of gun violence that has happened. I think we're reaching a tipping point where we're about to hit desensitization to gun violence.
It's been happening everywhere all the time because you, Congress, have done nothing to prevent it.
The case for the verdict. Analyzing the justifications for the Supreme Court's decision to strike down concealed carry regulations reveals a convoluted web of constitutional interpretation, historical background, and societal ramifications. With justices expressing different opinions on the limits of Second Amendment rights and the function of restrictions, the court's decision indicates a highly split bench. The judgment, which is grounded in the precedent created by the Bruen case, emphasizes how rapidly gun control laws are changing. The justices who voted in favor of the ruling place a strong emphasis on the protection of individual rights, while arguing that responsible gun owners are essential for both home security and crime prevention. However, dissenting justices express concerns over the consequences for public safety and the potential weakening of protections against unrestricted gun ownership.
They say they just want to regulate guns. They don't. They want to abolish guns.
From 2017 to 2021, 143 children were killed by guns.
That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.